Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Holy and Hormonal podcast. If you're new here, my name is Kim Gargano. I created this podcast as a safe space for us to approach periods and our hormones from a Christian perspective. Today on the podcast, I'm excited to welcome research scientist and rising science communicator, Ronnie Rose. Ronnie has contributed to research at two of the world's leading cancer hospitals, and over the years, her work has contributed to studies on bladder, lung, prostate, and most recently, breast cancer. She's also co-authored an educational textbook published by the American Society of Clinical Oncology, addressing the rising cost of cancer drugs and how it impacts patients' access, a topic that speaks directly to her mission. Her work has built a diverse background from lab work in neuroscience to ecology, experience that now helps her connect ideas across disciplines and fuels her bigger mission to make science accessible to underrepresented communities, to think about their health and empower them with knowledge. She's also a personal friend of mine and a sister in Christ, and I'm so excited for you guys to listen to this podcast and learn from her. And if you stick around for the end, she has a little freebie goodie to hand out to you guys. So make sure you stick around for that because it's a really, really helpful tool in self-awareness and managing your PMS symptoms. We literally talk about everything from being a woman in STEM to the history of PMDD. Like Ronnie literally goes in chronological order about the history of PMDD and how her faith in God illuminated her research and her whole entire mission now. It's incredible. I'm so excited to jump into this podcast episode. Ronnie, thank you so much for joining the Holy and Hormonal podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to chat. Let's dive into the first question. So, what inspired you in the first place to pursue a career in research?
Yeah, so for me, it was that desire for knowledge. What drew me to research was also the way that I could pursue that knowledge, which is through kinesthetic ways, so interactive ways. You can ask questions, you can hypothesize, and then you can actually test it. So that was one of the best things that I discovered in childhood when I was watching like Bill Nye and the influence of my brother and a really good high school teacher. So ultimately, this made me understand my world better. I felt like I found life hacks to life. So what I mean by that is like, for instance, understanding chemistry. So in ginger, for instance, there's bioactive compounds like gingerol, and this can help with reducing inflammation and alleviating bloating. And then in cooking, I realized like, oh, the smoke points that I learned in chemistry, I could apply the correct one here to fry food or saute food. High smoking points are used for frying food, ones with lower to medium for sauteing. And I was like, this is so interesting that these things can be applied on such a natural level, like right in front of me. And so I started to get a deeper understanding and wanted to do more of that. I wanted to observe more. I wanted to understand my environment deeper. So I have like a good example of this. Have you ever seen mice in New York City?
Oh, yes, I have.
Okay, so from your observations, how do they look to you?
They look like small dogs. Like they're huge. Their backs are so much bigger than their fronts, and their tails are super long, and they're interesting.
Yeah, very interesting looking. I think that was one of the culture shocks I had when I first came to New York. Something just skedaddled right by, and I'm like, that was not a rat. That is the size of a Canadian otter or beaver.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, that's an observation. And why do you think that is? Why do you think the rats in New York look like that?
Probably because they're eating literally so much food and like disgust. Like I don't know. Like they're just like not a species of animal. They're like human. It's so weird. But yeah,
Yeah.
like that's so interesting. Like having the drive to investigate that more because most people would probably just be like, ew, giant rat. Okay, moving on with my life. But you're sitting there being like, why are they like that?
Exactly, exactly. And yeah, I would also propose the what they eat. So the garbage, the food that we throw out, like there's a lot of restaurants, along the sidewalks. What they're throwing out, the mice are eating. So I'm like, whoa, that's the stuff that we eat.
Mm.
So this same thing happens in a lab settings where we observe a disease or a phenomenon, so like cancer. And then we create hypotheses about why this could be, and then we test it. And the most common model organism is a mouse. So I thought that was really interesting that we could take these macro level concepts and then make them into little miniature versions, little micro level experiments, and gain a deeper understanding of what's happening in our world around us. And that is why I pursued research.
That's so fascinating. I feel like growing up, most kids are either like math or science, like it's kind of split down the middle. And I've always been more of a science led person too. And it's just so fascinating, like having that inkling and that drive to understand the world. So obviously, I know a little bit more about your story, but what made you pivot into your current direction of research?
Yeah, when I get this question, I usually think of Exodus and how that story helped me develop my career path now. So one day, Moses was looking out and saw a laborer being abused, and the sight of that led him to righteously protect the laborer. He felt this overwhelming burden, and he used his strategic positioning in the palace to help. So I'd like to think that I've also had these types of encounters in hospital settings that made me now want to scale the impact that I could have on people, of who I could help. Because the reality is that real life impact doesn't always come from inside a molecular pipette in a lab,
Mhm.
especially when it comes to underrepresented communities that may never honestly be a research topic of focus, and where the gap between research and reality is the widest. So this led to an exciting evolution for me in my career, because I'm able to draw from my more creative design skills, a skill that I rarely used when I was in academia, to break down complex ideas and make them widely accessible for everyone to be able to read, to visualize, and to use. Again, I love that kinesthetic and visual learning experience, and everyone deserves that. So, like I always say with you, Kim, I mean, there's tons of data out there, but the real question is, how do I apply it to help myself?
Mhm.
And this is something you are also doing too, putting it into language, spiritual language, even, that would help women and men alike, if men watch your podcasts too,
There's a
to
few.
understand. Great. I love that. I love that. To help them understand how they can practice agency with their well being. So for me, that personally looks like copywriting, public advocacy workshops, infographics, one on one counseling. It's so interesting because 2 weeks ago, I actually met a girl who told me that she had PMDD. Like, I was talking about how I was doing some of this work with PMDD, and her eyes lit up and she's like, I just got diagnosed with that. And I was like, whoa. And she's like, we need to talk. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you need help. Okay, I want to help you. Let me help
Yeah.
however I can. So yeah, honestly, it's a beautiful thing to co-labor with God and to help people get back in control of their well-being and practice that agency in their life.
Yeah. I love that you're probably one of the only people I know, honestly, that are bridging the gap between the academia and the common folk. Like, I explained this before too, but getting labs and like understanding what your labs even say is so confusing. Like, if you're getting it at LabCorp or Quest or something, it's just showing you your range, and then you're left to kind of figure out, okay, what does this mean? What does this chemical or what does this hormone even do in the first place? And
Yeah,
you're stepping in being like, I want to be the communication highway between the doctors and the lay people, because we're the ones left, honestly, at the mercy of the professionals to tell us what's going on. And
exactly.
whether the advice is right or wrong, it doesn't matter. Like, we're still entitled to our own information and our own knowledge, but not many people have the resources or the tools to even do that. So I just commend you on what you're doing. And I think it's so special, and so the Lord literally putting you in the mission field for such a time as this.
Thank you so much, Kim. That's very encouraging, especially when you're right. Like, I personally haven't met anyone doing something similar. And it means there's a lot of figuring out on my own to do. Well,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily on my own. The Lord's been showing me vision, but it's a lot starting from scratch, but it's a beautiful process. I know that that's how it's going to be.
Yeah. So it's no, what am I trying to make the analogy to? It's no hidden thing that the medical field is very male dominated. So, how do you navigate being in a very male dominated field as a woman?
Well, for that, honestly, first, I came to that recognition that it was so male dominated, mostly in like high stress environments, very competitive environments, hospitals, IVs. And I noticed that there was a toll, this common pattern among like my colleagues, both at work and when I was in university, in the midst of trying to receive and strive for recognition in these very competitive fields. So again, that observation, what is the hypothesis there? So I was like, there's definitely a lot of different factors contributing to this: social, economic, political. I think the simplest way to put it is the institutional structures put in place were formed a very long time ago when women were not part of the workforce. They were really scarce. And since then, there's been very little change. Even in women's health research, it's led by a lot of men. The last place that I worked at, it was a breast cancer lab, and it was led by a man. And while it's very well intentioned, I believe that women are able to discern their unique experiences better. And it's sad when female specific conditions are often understudied, there's smaller sample sizes, or there's less of an urgency for funding towards these studies and they move really slowly. So, in observing all of this, I noticed that I wanted to help change that narrative. The amount of times I'll be sitting reading a publication and the sample sizes are just so off. It's like, wow, there's so many men here. Why is
Mm-hmm.
the female sample size so small? And then there's even, it goes even deeper with like the races that were chosen and who's able to access that help and which sample sizes are able to actually attend these studies and everything. So it gets very nuanced. But regardless of those nuances, I knew that I wanted to create a narrative that would promote women, not to feel like they had to survive in these environments, but so that they could thrive in these spaces and that these spaces could honor their work and the way that their biology works in these environments.
Yeah, I mean, like, talk about like literally just the biological differences between men and women. Like, women have a lower threshold for stress. Like, we're not biologically designed to handle stress in the same way as men. And it's not even just like the ratio of male to female in these spaces, it's how the institution is run. Like, the threshold for those long days, like, how far can you push yourself? How far do you want to like compete and really like hustle for a higher position or whatever it is? It's so male focused. And
Mhm.
so trying to navigate, like, how can I bring my femininity into the workplace while not compromising, myself and my morals and the things that I am naturally good at? Like, it's a very hard balance to find sometimes.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's sad to see when there's a loss, when there's so much talent and potential there, but there's a loss because of the balance that women require in their life because they don't just produce at work, they're also homemakers. Some of them are also homemakers, some of them are caretakers to family, and there's all these other roles, so many hats that women play,
Mm-hmm.
that these sorts of environments that are very competitive and have very high expectations and standards set by men can really disadvantage women.
Yeah, I agree. So I want to talk about PMDD a little bit. So, what sparked a passion for you to dive deeper into women's health, like specifically PMDD?
Yeah, again, it was those experiences interacting with women colleagues who would silently struggle with these conditions. They'd always need time off, like especially during that luteal phase, but not really have an excuse that would be respected in school and in work. And yeah, this struck a lot of interest because I would look up like PMDD on Google Scholar and a lot of other literature websites like Nature and Molecular Cell. And there's very little information on PMDD. Things that I could find, it was like very small sample sizes, or it was actually PMS. And then we kind of just have to deduce things based off of what the research says about PMS. Thankfully, today, because of breakthroughs, we know that PMDD is a neuroendocrine condition. It's a hypersensitivity during the hormonal changes in the luteal phase and affects mood and emotions weeks before menstruation. So different from PMS. The best way that I came to understand PMDD is to think of it like a smoke detector. So with the smoke detector, it detects those changes, the smoke in the environment, and our brains can detect those hormonal changes in our bodies during the luteal phases. But the difference is that people with PMDD, they have a hypersensitive smoke detector. So it signals earlier, and because it signals earlier, the luteal phase can be very intense for these individuals. It's like experiencing PMSing, but for a longer period of time. So that intensity can make life hard, can make work hard, and can create a stigma around it too. I've heard lots of stories, and I've experienced myself where I said, oh, PMDD to a physician or a doctor, and they're like, what's that? Still. So yeah, this is all the more reason why this work is so important. And I'd love to go through the literature with you. I sent you
Yes.
over, yeah, an infographic, and I'd love to take you along from the first reports of PMDD all the way to growing awareness work that's happening now.
Yeah, please.
So, yeah, we can start in 1931. Dr. Robert Frank first described PMD-like symptoms in a medical paper. This was during the US Great Depression, where medical resources and mental health awareness was extremely limited. So, women's pain was often just covered by, oh, they might have hysteria or they're just being emotional. It's very sad. Between the 1940s to 1950s, a few voices started coming up, and there were a few scattered reports being published about women experiencing these symptoms before their period. Patterns were beginning to be noticed through observations. And for the most part, though, these patterns were largely ignored. This is also around the time when World War II was happening and post-war America. So women were in the workforce, and that's why I put the little icon, the Rosie the Riveter, who was the representative image for women who went to work while their men were in the war. 1960s, researchers began exploring hormonal causes of menstrual mood shifts. So studies began to emerge. There were about 10 to 20 publications at this time. And just to set the context, this was around the civil rights movement. The women's liberation movement was gaining momentum, but medical systems still couldn't find the place to prioritize women's health. So then we get into the 1970s, where there's studies that are now linking PMS to mental health. But PMDD at this time still is not a thing. It's not existent in medical vocabulary. This isn't a surprise because even in this time, mental health in general for women and men alike is very under-researched.
Right.
So then in 1987, the name for PMDD was late luteal phase dysphoric disorder. So it was LLPDD. I'm glad it's not called that anymore.
Yeah, seriously.
That's very long. But yeah, that was what they called it. And it was finally recorded in the DSM 3, but it needed further study. It wasn't yet well recognized amongst physicians and psychiatrists. In case people don't know what the DSM is, the DSM is a diagnostic tool used by physicians and psychiatrists, and it helps them diagnose people with mood and mental disorders. So then in 1994, LLPDD is renamed PMDD, and now it's in the DSM-4. There's about over 200 studies emerging about PMDD. And this is also to set the context around the time of third wave feminism, and early internet forums are forming. So people are chatting online, not a lot, but there's still chatter going on and things are coming into knowing. So 2013, PMDD is officially recognized as a mental disorder in the DSM-5. And
Wow,
SF,
that's such a long period of time.
yeah, it really
Wow.
is, especially if you put it in respect to male
Yeah.
diseases and disorders. So yeah, I'll get to that in 2025. I have this comparison. But yeah, by 2013, SSRIs are used as the gold standard for mood disorders. So this is essentially antidepressants are being given to women experiencing PMDD. But the interesting part, Kim, is that scientists are giving SSRIs because they're clinically sufficient, but not necessarily because they know how it works, how it actually targets the PMDD.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, at least in this time, mental health is starting to have traction, starting to become mainstream, but PMDD is still very underdiagnosed and misdiagnosed. There's misdiagnosis is even today of ADHD, bipolar, simply depression.
Mm-hmm.
So still prevalent since 2013. 2017 to 2019, studies prove PMDD is in fact cellular, hence a neuroendocrine interaction. So the hormones that control our menstrual cycle, they're causing the brain to trigger these symptomatic responses, the hypersensitive responses. This is found out by two scientists, Eisenlohr and Moll and Dewey. And this was around the time of the Me Too movement, where women were also starting to share a lot of dismissive medical experiences.
Mm.
So voices are finally being heard a little more. By the 2020s, advocacy grows and media coverage, like by BBC and Instagram platforms, spotlight PMDD. There's a recognizable cultural shift here, and I think that COVID-19 was a huge part of this, putting a spotlight on mental health, because now people are working from home, including women, and cycles are harder to hide. So women are desperately seeking help for this. Yeah. So then we get to 2025, and more studies and publications are still coming out, but I would have to say that we're still behind. I'll give you an example. There's roughly 23,000 publications for PMDD right now at this moment, yet 2.7 million exist for prostate cancer. So that
Million?
2.7 million. So for every PMDD paper, there's 117 for prostate cancer.
Wow.
Yeah, and this is something I realized also while working in academia. There's a it's likely caused by a huge gender bias that also affects funding gaps. So there's
Yeah.
clearly more work to do for better treatment options for women, better information for women, and why this work is so important, Kim.
Yeah, seriously. Thank you for going through that whole entire history. I just learned so much. And it's so crazy because, like, women were not allowed to be in research until the 90s. And it's like, we have so much to catch up on. And it's like, will we ever get
Mm.
to a place where it's like, oh, we can settle on this amount of paper in this time? It just feels like we're constantly playing catch up for women's health. And it's wild. It's really wild. It's the biggest disservice we could have towards women. And PMDD is a tricky one because it masks itself and it presents itself as a neurological disorder. So these doctors aren't really getting the right training because there's not enough literature on it. So they don't even know how to like direct women to the right resources. They'll throw them on birth control or antidepressants and be like, "Oh, that'll help." But it's like that's not what we're targeting here though. Like it's such a crazy disorder and so difficult to understand at the same time. I'm only saying this too because I want to give the medical professionals the benefit of the doubt. Like they're only going off of what's presented in front of them, and
Mhm.
across the board there's just not enough education at all. And we have a lot of catching up to do before we can really confidently be like, all right, we're getting to the bottom of this PMDD thing. Like I feel like even more women are getting diagnosed now than ever. And they're like,
Yeah,
what do I do?
yeah, I agree. And that's because of the power that we have with social media, with being able to disseminate our own voices and the things we care about online. And I only see that growing. So I'm really hopeful that things will get better. And there's a lot of things we can do in our own right to practice our air agency to get diagnosed correctly.
Yeah. So something I feel like I struggle with because I do have PMDD and a lot of the listeners also can relate to this like spiritual component of having your period. Like the luteal phase hits and it's like, am I going through spiritual warfare or is this really just my hormones? So like how can we as Christians steward our bodies well, even with PMS or PMDD? Like, is there a spiritual component to this? And like, what would be your best advice for girls trying to decipher what's going on?
Yeah, there's definitely a spiritual component to this. And there are components that we can observe on our own in the natural. So, what I mean by that is kind of like the suggestion I made in the beginning, observation. Observation, we can all do that. We can all become self aware of what kind of changes are happening in my body. If someone has PMDD, they're going to notice. So, they may not know what exactly it is, whether it's bipolar, ADHD, you name it, but at the least we can start tracking things. There are amazing apps to do this. I personally use Flow. There's another one called Lively, but doing this work on our own time, like tracking our mood, you'll notice that you have like a Jekyll and Hyde personality shift almost around your luteal phase. That's one thing you could track. Appetite changes, cravings, like deep cravings, desires for fried and carb loaded foods, not just 3 days before your period, but 12 days before. Even in the body, edema, so water retention that causes weight gain, swollen feet, tender breasts. These are all things that we can do on our own and track down so that when we make it to the physician's office, it's easier for them to pull out the DSM-5 and be like, okay, this falls under this, and diagnose you more accurately than completely misdiagnose you because you're walking in completely blind, like, I don't even know what I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sad when people walk in like that in the hospital and it's like, let me help you.
Yeah, it's like I just need the information. Like I can only help you as much as you are allowing me into like
Yeah.
your mind and your body. And I think tracking too also helps with the spiritual component because it can feel like spiritual warfare, but if it's happening cyclically, always in your luteal phase, it might just be PMDD. If it's happening all the time and it's like deeply, or you're questioning God's love for you, like the devil is like prompting you, you know, to like sin against the Lord, like that's, it can feel like it's a mesh sometimes. And there's definitely a world where it can happen at the same time. But the more that you track and kind of pinpoint, you'll be able to be like, okay, a little bit of this is trickling into my luteal phase, but this definitely feels more physical than it feels spiritual. But you won't know those things until you have that self-awareness and you are observing your body, like you just said.
Yeah. And I think you made a great point, that enmeshment that happens between, oh, is this spiritual or is this just PMDD? Another thing we can do that I'm realizing is we can practice Sabbath rest. So, what I mean by that is it's intentionally pausing from work to realign with God, right?
Yeah.
And so, in this stage, in the menstrual cycle, in the luteal phase, we can use this as intentional time to realign with Him and really hear what it is. Is this PMDD or is this spiritual warfare? The Sabbath was traditionally practiced on Saturdays. But if you think about work life balance now, work does not end when we just leave the office or the lab. We have longer days, we're working on weekends, and so we have access to work everywhere. And accordingly, our bodies are going to respond the same way. So I think we can practice Sabbath rest and give ourselves that greater opportunity to realign with God and set intentional time to rest and set boundaries so that we can have a more balanced view of whether this is spiritual or this is my body speaking, and give it that space to breathe and to
Mm-hmm.
get better.
Yeah, rest is a word that more women need to hear and they need to give themselves permission to do because we are not designed biologically to go 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 go. We're going to hit adrenal burnout. We're going to see problems with weight gain. We're going to have trouble losing weight. We're going to feel the effects of it so much faster. And I think some women just literally need to hear that it's okay to rest. And
Mm-hmm.
some women also, like, in a weird way, will not rest because it's like this weird thing of like, you go throughout your week and you're like, oh, I just wish I had a day where I could do nothing. And then you have a day where you can do nothing. And then you're like, well, I'm sitting here and I could be doing 500 other things and I'm so lazy and I'm like guilting myself. Literally, me too. Like you feel guilty for taking the rest because it's like, oh, that other to-do list that I haven't gotten to yet. It's so hard for women to just be like, I don't have to do it all. I can just rest in the Lord. Like I think about
Mm-hmm.
Mary and Martha. Martha was just working, 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 and all probably with good intent. She wants to prepare the dinner and the table, and she's hosting, and she wants to be a good host. And Mary's just sitting at Jesus's feet, just listening to him. And then Martha's like, Jesus, can you tell Mary to help me? Like, this is so unfair. And Jesus is like, Mary chose the better thing in this situation. Like, let her sit and listen and learn from me. And we need to be more like Mary and less like Martha in those situations. And Jesus loves Mary and Martha both the same. There's a time and a
Mm-hmm.
place for both things. But when you're constantly going and going, I think Jesus is just like, Mary, 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 please just sit with me, Mary. Just sit at my feet and listen to me. So this conversation is so beautiful and I just feel the Lord all over it. So like from your perspective now as a Christian, like how has your faith illuminated research and how has God kind of like opened your eyes in your whole career?
Yeah, I thought this was interesting even in our talks before because there's so many moments when the Lord illuminated himself through the research and even his creation to me. And I just specifically remember this one moment where it was a Friday night in the cancer research lab. I was in a dark room. This is a little story time, Kim.
I'm excited. I'm listening.
Yeah, I was asked to stay very late, like until 8 p.m. And I had to use immunostaining microscopy to look at the differences between cancer tumor cells. And so I'm sitting in this dark room. There's this one little light in front of me. I'm like clicking, taking pictures of the slides, analyzing them. And there was just this moment where the awe and the glory of the Lord hit me. I sat there and I'm like, wow, these cells look like nebulas and galaxies in outer space.
Wow.
And I thought it was so crazy how you can see the fingerprints of God in everything if you pay enough attention. So in that image, some of those are cells and some of those are nebulas and galaxies. Can you tell the difference?
I mean,
It's hard to.
yeah.
They look so strikingly beautiful and similar, and it's like, wow, he's there too, and it looks like this in that realm too, in
Wow.
space. And
That's
so
insane.
yeah, honestly. And at that moment, two verses came to my mind. So one was Romans 1:19-20. I'll read it here. They know the truth about God because he has made it obvious to them. For ever since the world was created, people have seen the earth and sky. Through everything God made, they can clearly see his invisible qualities, his eternal power, and his divine nature. So they have no excuse for not knowing God.
Preach it.
The second verse, Isaiah 55, 8-9. My thoughts are nothing like your thoughts, says the Lord. My ways are far beyond anything you could imagine. For just as the heavens are higher than the earth, so my ways are higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts. And it doesn't even end there, Kim. I was just so struck by his magnificence in that moment. It's like, wow, your ways really are higher, so high that these tumors look like galaxies and
Mm-hmm.
constellations and nebulas. And then I realized that the way galaxies are formed are very similar to how cancer metastasizes as well. So both begin from a small place. So like there's one tumorous cell in the body, whereas in the galaxies, there's a small dense spot, and then both grow quickly. So galaxies start pulling things in, where cancer cells start copying itself. They start replicating, proliferating. And in growing, in both things growing, they start to travel. So in cancer, the cancer travels to other parts of the body. And in space, it grows in size and starts to cover more mass in space and take over more area. And in their respective fields, both cause huge changes in the atmosphere.
Mm.
So then I kept thinking, and I'm like, wait, isn't there a constellation named Cancer.
Is there really?
So I looked it up quickly, and there's a constellation named Cancer located in the northern celestial hemisphere. According to Greek mythology, the constellation formed after Carcinos, this giant evil crab, was crushed under the foot of Hercules during a battle.
Wow.
The crab's remains were placed in the sky, forming the Cancer constellation. Now, of course, this is Greek myth, but the part that stuck out to me was the motif of the hero crushing evil under the soles of his feet.
Come on now.
So I was just like, whoa. Like, you can call it what you want, but at the end of the day, we know the story, we know who won, and we see his fingerprints of it everywhere.
Amen. Girl, keep going. Keep preaching. Jeez, that is so beautiful. Like, talk about Genesis right there.
Yeah.
Like, he will bruise your heel maybe, but you're going to stomp on his head. Like, you're going to defeat him.
Yeah.
Like, come on. That is so good. Wow. My mind is blown right now.
Yeah, like, you'll see victory everywhere if you look for God in what you're doing. And so I realized that. I think you also asked, how does this help others? How do these revelations lead me? How does Jesus lead me to help others? Well, when I would share these things, so see these revelations at work, I would immediately, like a little nerd, email my pastor and be like, oh my goodness, look at what I realized at work.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, and he's so sweet to also reply back and be like, oh my goodness, amazing, Sharon. I love him. So I realized, and I was encouraged, that not a lot of people can see these connections, that these intricacies in his creation. They're called natural revelation, I discovered. And I realized I had this ability to connect different things. So I could draw clarity from complexity. I could make the profound practical. And this was a gift. And what do you do with a gift from God? You're meant to use it to serve. And then I realized, well, that's what Ronnie Rose is about. That's what I want to do. I want to use this gift to make the profound practical for everyone so that they can all enjoy it and they can all live the life that God intended for them.
Amen. Girl, I could listen to you literally talk all day. Like, the wisdom and the knowledge that comes out of you, like, you're anointed. You're so anointed. Seriously. And I have the honor of being your friend and knowing even more of your story and your testimony. And you're so special to the Lord. You're so special. He's put you literally in this place for a reason, because he trusts you. He trusts that you're going to steward it well, and you are. And as your friend, I'm so proud of you. And I'm just like blown away by you. Seriously.
Oh,
you're
thank
amazing.
you, Kim. It's so interesting that these little things that I just like, honestly, Kim, I've been emailing these things for years. I've been writing all these sorts of things down for years, and I didn't really make much of it until it was time. And so that is so encouraging to hear.
Yeah, I mean, Jesus spent 30 years preparing for his ministry, and it only lasted 3 years.
That part.
Yeah. So the Lord always wants the roots to go deeper before there's growth and expansion outwards. That's all he cares about, is, are the roots solid? Is the foundation strong? And you spent the time making sure that that foundation is solid and it is built on the rock. And now it's time. And now the Lord's breathing on it and is like, go. This is your ministry now. You're well prepared. Go steward this well. I trust you. So my last question for you would be, what is your advice for other women looking to get into the medical field?
Yeah. So both for women that want to work in research or in the hospital side of things, it's important to keep in mind that hospitals are a battleground. They are spiritually pivotal places where life, death, healing, and eternity intersect. So this is, in essence, kingdom work. Like, this is no joke.
Yeah.
So with it comes spiritual warfare. Burnout is real, not just physical, emotional, mental burnout, but spiritual burnout. Why? Because you're literally standing between the gap of suffering and salvation. So honestly, when I saw this and when I would see this suffering, I realized and I knew that strength could not come from my own self, but from something greater.
Mm-hmm.
So that would look like grounding myself in the purposes and the promises he writes in the Bible, to be armed in prayer, to put on the whole armor of truth. And it's so interesting because one day when I came to this realization, I was walking by the bookstore in the hospital and there was a book called Resilience. I just picked it up and I started reading. I got to a page where it said that both patients and healthcare workers who trust in something greater than themselves experience deeper resilience and endurance in the hospital setting. So I thought that was so interesting and something that people who are interested in the medical field can take away, to have something bigger than themselves to sustain their efforts and to sustain their mission there.
Yeah, like literally got to go in there armored up, prayed up, and also know that the Lord's got you. If he sent you
Mm-hmm.
there and he's allowing you to be there, he's protecting you and he's got you. But we're not void of dealing with spiritual warfare. We're not immune from having vulnerabilities and things that really deeply bother us. So we also have to do our part to make sure that we're prayed up, we're rooted in the Lord, and we are relying on God in those situations to just get us through the day. And Lord, use me however you see fit.
Exactly. Yeah. And that goes for any industry, really, because
Mm-hmm.
I don't know any industry that's unscathed by sin. There's perversion
Amen.
everywhere. And so, resilience, believing something greater than you, is always going to help with that mission, that assignment you have there. And also
Exactly.
understand when an assignment is over.
Period.
Don't make him grab you by your hair and, drag you out of there.
That is a good word. Make sure you know when it's time to walk away. That's so good. Ronnie, thank you so much for joining this podcast. Where can viewers find you if they want to get in contact with you? How can they do that?
They can contact me on my website. So that's ronnierose.nyc. And I've even prepared a cute little self-awareness resource that I would love to share with your viewers. They can send me an inquiry on my website and I'll send that over to them. I also want to encourage inquisitiveness, so curiosity. If they have questions about health, I want to be able to lead them to the right resources or help them myself if I have that capacity within me based on what they ask. And I'm also open to collaborating on projects that uplift communities of women, people of color, low income backgrounds. I'd love to collaborate and serve public or private clientele. So I'm open for business. I'm open to do
Awesome.
that.
Ladies, absolutely email her. If you've made it through this whole podcast, you have to send her an email now. Seriously, you're not going to regret it. Ronnie, thank you so much for all the wisdom that you shared. Thank you for sharing your story and being vulnerable with us. I know that the women listening to this are going to walk away with so much spiritual meat. So thank you for your yes, and thank you for being a part of this.
Thank you for having me, Kim, as always. Love talking to you. Love the revelations that we come to and the experiences that we can share with each other to encourage each other in what we're doing. Like, this is kingdom work.
Yes, literally amen to that.